one thing that I really love about summer is going down to the park, a couple times a week maybe, to serve the Grub Club lunches to the kids down there. Usually in the summer, the sun is shining, the kids are running around, they're yelling and playing, and it's just a perfect picture. It all seems to be right with the world. Of course, the park is a great setting for that. It's a beautiful place, and there's trees and there's grass. We have this wonderful stream that runs along the side of it. There are swings, there's a slide, there's a skate ramp, basketball hoops, and other things for the kids to ride on and play on. It's a really good park for a little town like Bay City. So the kids are having this great carefree time there, and they're playing with all of these things. They're out there in God's good creation, and you have to say to yourself, it's a wonderful world, like the song. But there's one other thing that is really essential for making that setting a wonderful world. And that's because there are moms and dads and other adults there kind of silently, well, not always silently, sometimes they're yelling at their kids, but they have to. Okay. But they're there watching their kids. They're making sure that they're having a good, safe time there. They can play in a carefree way because they know that there's some adults there watching out over them to make sure that they're safe. And that's the way we want it to be for our kids. We want them to be safe. We want our parks, our schools, our churches to be God's wonderful world for them, where they can have their innocence, their childhood, and just enjoy and celebrate that. And the kids, they count on that. They should be able to count on that. But unfortunately, in the world that we live in, we know they can't always count on having a safe, welcoming environment, even in church. And year after year, we hear these heartrending stories in the media about child abuse, about abuse even in the church. It happens in our denomination and in every denomination across the religious spectrum. There's a certain percentage of abuse in all of these religious bodies. So obviously, Christian people need to do a much better job watching out over our kids and our vulnerable ones in our midst. And by vulnerable ones, I mean, kids who have mental or physical challenges. I mean, older adults, seniors who are more fragile. All of these folks are vulnerable and need a little bit of extra care. So because of this, because we have not, as a country and as religious people, really done the job that we should in caring for these folks, the Oregon-Idaho Conference of the United Methodist Church requires that every year we dedicate a worship service to this very important responsibility. So this is something that certainly applies here, but it applies to us wherever we go, where as adults we need to be vigilant and caring about folks that are under our supervision. The church should always be a safe and welcoming place for kids. And when it's not, it's because we have dropped the ball. We have failed to see that for Jesus, children are central to Jesus' vision of the kingdom of God. And so if we're not placing these vulnerable ones at the top of our priority list, we are not following Jesus' vision of the kingdom. Now, in the ancient world that Jesus preached and taught in, disregarding children was even far worse than what you see in the Western world here. The surrounding culture did not value children highly. They were basically of no use until they could become productive adults in some way. If families weren't ready for kids, they would just dump them on the roadside, expecting that somebody maybe would take care of them. More often than not, they were simply left exposed and perished. Jesus himself was raised in a religious culture that definitely prized children far more than the surrounding pagan world. But nonetheless, kids were at the bottom of the social ladder. At the top of the ladder, things maybe aren't too different now. Wealthy men. Next, men in general. Then, oftentimes it was slaves, then women, then at the very bottom, children. Children at the very bottom. They frequently could not advocate for themselves. I mean, they had no rights, so they couldn't. And so they were very subject to abuse. So look at how radical Jesus is being by putting this living, breathing child in the midst of the disciples, the leaders of the Kingdom of God movement. And he's saying to them, if you don't become like this child, you can't enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever welcomes one such child in my name is welcoming me. That's a powerful statement that upends the whole social hierarchy that the disciples were raised in. And today, maybe it would give you a different perspective on how important child care is. What kind of place do we make in this church for children? What kind of a priority is that for the children and vulnerable adults here? Do we care for them? Are we making a place for them here? I think we have room to work on that. There are other verses where Jesus says, don't inhibit these children from coming to me. And then he threatens dire consequences on those who put stumbling blocks before these kids. So this is so important to Jesus because Jesus understands that child abuse can scar a person for life. Abuse affects your self-worth, your ability to have relationships, your capacity to hope and to have faith. Abused children grow up fearful and insecure. They have trouble venturing out with confidence into the world. They frequently struggle with a lasting sense of shame, and they oftentimes feel that they're to blame for the abuse. So many times you hear them say they feel dirty and unlovable. How can we do that to people? So this sense of hopelessness envelops them, kind of a gray universe where they don't feel strong enough to change anything or to express themselves. They become very passive sometimes. Sometimes they become very controlling in an effort to protect themselves. So in these very powerful ways, abuse seriously wounds our ability to love other people and to love God. So this abuse epidemic, as you know, is widespread. Experts say that 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys are sexually abused before their 18th birthday. That's shocking. 30 to 40% of these children are abused by family members. As many as 60% of them are abused by people that the family trusts. Nearly 40% are abused by older or bigger children. This is a horrible plague in our society, and it is unjust. In Psalm 82, God says, "Give justice to the weak and the orphan. Maintain the right of the lowly and the destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the oppressor." That is the calling and responsibility of all of us here in this fellowship. Every one of us have that responsibility. We are the ones responsible for the children and for the vulnerable ones that are in our midst. No one else. It's not somebody else's job to watch out for them. In that passage, Jesus is, with that gesture of placing the children in their midst, Jesus is saying, look, I have placed these children and these vulnerable ones in your midst. I have placed them in your care. And you cannot get into the kingdom of heaven if you don't welcome them, if you don't protect them, and if you don't learn from them. Prophet Isaiah has this beautiful image where he says, a little child shall lead them. So imagine that. Imagine, what life would be like, how it would be transformed if our leading priority for and making life right for children and vulnerable people, for the poor and the needy. What kind of world do we live in then? You know, this really is a wonderful world, and where it's not, it can be a wonderful world. God places these children among us to show us that the kingdom of heaven can be in our midst. It can be. So our sacred task is to treasure and to protect the precious lives that God places in our care. That's who we are as a church. It's not just the adults that we arrange church for. It's also the kids, the vulnerable ones, those with disabilities of various kinds. Jesus says that as we welcome these kids, these vulnerable ones, we are welcoming Jesus himself. So that's our calling. That's what we're focusing on today. And we're going to have Ben and Teresa come up first, and they're going to kind of review us on some of the traits of abuse, you know, what to look for. And then afterwards, we'll have a couple people come up and talk to us just a little bit about what our procedures are, our safe sanctuaries procedures. So we'll start with Ben and Teresa.